Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And this meeting is being recorded. Today, I'm Lenitra Guest, and I am the PNP Private Nonprofit Ombudsman in the Federal Program Compliance Division. We will also have Corey Green, the Associate Commissioner of the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration, that will also be providing information on today. This is our agenda. We'll have a few updates from Corey Green from the department. I will present an overview of Equitable Services, information on what is a private nonprofit, or PNP as we call it, Affirmation of Consultation. And I will also be talking about the USDE's latest Title I Part A, Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, guidance that was released in October of 2019. And then I will also share some resources that will be helpful as you move forward in learning more about private nonprofit equitable services. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Corey Green to discuss updates and provide information from the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration. Corey? Okay, we may need to come back to Corey. So I will continue on. An overview of equitable services. First, I wanted to share that there is, Edgar defines nonprofit. I want to talk a little bit about that. EDGAR stands for the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. And so within EDGAR, there is a section that actually defines the term nonprofit. And that term, it means an agency, organization, or institution that does not have net earnings. They don't earn a benefit. And it is the responsibility of the private nonprofit school to provide information to share with the local educational agency, the district, that they are actually labeled as a nonprofit school in order to be eligible for services. Equitable services are required. The local educational agencies, which I will refer to as LEAs, they're required to provide services for eligible private nonprofit school students. And so your private school may or may not have eligible students for specific programs. And the LEA is the one that would help you to determine if you have eligible students and if your school is actually eligible to receive services. The equitable services are designed to actually meet the private nonprofit educational needs. And so it may be different needs from the district, and the private schools should be able to share data to support what their educational needs are, and whatever equitable services are provided need to be supplemental to what the private school is already providing. So for example, if the private school is working on reading, they have a reading block, and they have some students that are struggling in reading, and they need to be provided additional services to help them with reading, they would not be able to remove those students from their core content in order to receive services from the LEA in that subject of reading. They will actually need to attend all their core academic areas, and then the LEA would be providing additional services to support what the private school is already providing. Equitable services must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological for all educational services, materials, and equipment. And so basically what that means is there can be nothing that is supported with federal funds in order to, that has a religious content. And so it must be secular and neutral. The services must be comparable to what is being provided in the public school. It's not going to be exactly the same thing, but it would be comparable to the public school according to the needs in that private nonprofit school. The services must be provided in a timely manner. So for example, if you are providing services to if the LEA is providing services in August or September, then private nonprofit services should be started shortly afterwards, because the school does have to go in and determine who is eligible for services in a private nonprofit. So it's not going to start at exactly the same time as the public schools, just because there may be some testing that needs to occur and information gathered once school starts and you actually realize the number of students that you have in the private school and who is eligible for services. But it should start that same semester and not long after the private school, after the LEA has started services. The equitable services are monitored and enforced by the state ombudsman, and I'll speak a little bit more in depth about that later. I'm going to talk about some of the eligible programs for equitable services under the Every Student Succeeds Act. The first one is Title I, Part A, Equitable Services, and that is in Section 1117 of the ESSA, and that gives all the requirements for Title I, Part A, Equitable Services. And then we have under Title 8, Equitable Services of the Every Student Succeeds Act, Section 8501, it covers all the remaining programs in which a private school may have eligibility for student services. And so Title I Part C is migrant services for students. Title II Part A are going to be services that professional development opportunities for teachers, principals, and staff in the private school. For Title III Part A, it's going to be services for English learners and immigrants that qualify for those services. Title IV Part A are services for student support and academic enrichment, and that's going to be able to support students in the entire school. And Title IV Part B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, equitable services may be provided in that program as well. The number one question I receive a lot is, may pre-K programs located in a private nonprofit school participate and receive equitable services? Pre-K programs may be eligible to receive services if they are in a building that also provides a grade level. So if it is a pre-K only private school or a nursery through pre-K private school, they will not be eligible to provide services. And so I have a link on here that gives the details from the U.S. Department of Ed on how pre-K services may be provided. A private school does not receive additional equitable services if the pre-K students are being served in an eligible building, because the count for eligible services is your K through 12 students that are, for Title I Part A, it's going to be those low income eligible students that are going to generate the funding. And so it's pre-K students do not generate funding for equitable services. There is an ESSA, private nonprofit, affirmation of consultation form that an LEA and a private school will need to review and sign. As during a consultation meeting, the LEA will go through the consultation form, and it will cover all of the programs that are available to that LEA. And if they're available to that LEA, then they check to see if the private school has eligible students that would be able to receive eligible services. And so you'll see that we have one affirmation that covers all programs, and except for one. And then there is a separate affirmation that covers just the 21st Century Learning Center programs. So for our first program, our first affirmation that actually provides services for the majority of the programs, this year there is a new section, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, that is the carryover section. And when I bring that up, I'll talk a little bit more about that. This affirmation will be due September 3rd, which is the same time that a local education agency or district must submit their consolidated application. And so they need to submit that form on behalf of the private school to TEA. And the districts upload that into a secured system once private school and the district has signed off on the affirmation of consultation. For 21st century, there is no carryover allowed, so you won't see a carryover section on that particular form, and it is due with the grant cycle because they do have different due dates for their grant cycles. So this shows you the top of what our affirmation of consultation form looks like. And as you can see, the LEA will enter the name of the LEA, their county district number, and then the name of the private nonprofit school that is participating. And if a school is not participating, the district would keep that information on file. They would not submit this form to TEA. But if they are participating in each of these programs that you see labeled, they would select from a drop-down menu, participating, not participating, or they're participating by a shared service agreement. And they would need to do that for each of the programs in which the LEA receives programs. And then the bottom half of the form this year that's new is that carryover discussion assurance. And so even though at this point you're not discussing a dollar amount of what could be a tentative carryover amount. So in the box you could put to be determined, but basically we need to capture that the district did have a discussion with the private school on how carryover would, the requirements of carryover, if there is any carryover at the end of the year. They would need to have a date entered for the date of discussion. The private school will need to sign, as well as a district official signature. So all that is doing is not assuring that, yes, you're going to have carryover. It's only stating you have had a discussion among yourselves about the carryover requirements and what happens if you do have a request for carryover. And then the last section is going to be the section that has been there typically, which is just saying that the private school and the LEA has met, and they're going to sign that in those boxes to say, we've met, we've discussed the services for this year, and the district would submit a form for each private school that is participating. with a service. As I stated earlier, the 21st Community Learning Centers has a separate affirmation of consultation from the other programs. And I will say that it is, there are fewer private schools that are eligible or that participate with the Title IV Part B. And so this is the top part of that form. And so it's a little similar to the other one. And what I wanted to highlight more is that there is a one-pager that describes what the requirements are for private schools participating in Title IV Part B, which is the 21st Community Learning Centers, as well as it gives a list of the current 21st Community Learning Centers that are receiving a grant. And so you will have the names of those and have what the description is in order to participate with those services if eligible. There is a, so now I'm going to start talking about the Title I Part A Equitable Services. The non-regulatory guidance was put out by the U.S. Department of Ed in October 2019. And so I'm not going to discuss all of them. It is posted on our website, but I'm going to go over a few of the things that are in that new guidance from last fall. It specifically points out the roles for private nonprofit officials during the consultation meeting. And so the first one is a designated private nonprofit official must participate with the consultation meeting that the district is having. And so those consultation meetings may be one-on-one, or it may be in a group session where a district or an education service center is discussing what the consultation requirements are, and then they break up and speak with individual schools just to let them know how they would, what they would qualify for. The private school must also assist the LEA with information that's necessary to identify low-income students. If a private school is not willing to share low-income data, then they would not be able to participate with any of our ESSA Title I Part A programs, because we use that data to determine how those students are qualified, and use that data to determine what the equitable share is for Title I Part A. And so if you don't provide that information to the district, they would not be able to calculate what the low income is for your students in order to generate Title I Part A funding. The private school must also provide addresses, grade levels, and ages that will meet the eligibility criteria for Title I Part A. And that is for the LEA to determine that that particular student would be eligible for Title I services if they met the low income status and they were in a residential Title I attendance zone. So that's why they would need the addresses. The private school should come to the meeting suggesting some program designs and modifications that would actually meet the needs of their individual private school. And so it's encouraged that the private school has data to support why they feel funds should be used for equitable services in a certain way and in a certain program. And so being able to share that data or your desired program designs with the LEA is what's important. In defining the private nonprofit assistance to LEAs. These are just some of the examples that the private school could share during the consultation meeting. The eligible students from low-income families, as well as the academic performance of those low-achieving students, because it's those students that will be eligible for services, those that are low-achieving, that would have attended a Title I attendance center. We get a lot of questions asking about Title I Part A direct administration. And so on the left side, it's talking about what is in our private nonprofit guidance that was in August 2017. And that is, it must be reasonable and necessary for an LEA to reserve direct administration from Title I Part A. It must be discussed during consultation, and it is reserved from the PNP Equitable share. However, the LEA and the PNP must discuss what that direct administration will be. TEA guidance has not changed with the new USDE guidance that was released in October 2019. There is still a maximum direct administration cap of 7% in the TEA guidance. And if a district is requesting greater than 7%, then they must let me back up. If they're requesting greater than 7%, then they could be at a greater audit. They could be looking at an audit. They could be looking at a greater risk of being audited by our financial fiscal monitoring, our federal fiscal monitoring team, if it's greater than 10%. Under the USDE Title I Part A guidance, one of the other things they talk about is a third-party contractor. If there is a third-party contractor and there is administration, that also would come from the reservation of the private nonprofit share, and the costs must be identified in the contract. In the past, direct administration did not need to be identified in the contract, but with the new changes in the guidance, it does need to identify what is the cost for administration for that third-party contractor. And I will say, if you have questions, please go to Slido, which is www.slido.com, and event code number PNP 101, and you would type your questions under audience Q&A. As the district is talking about during consultation, they should discuss options for providing equitable services to the private school. It's either going to be our usual, which is the school-by-school basis, that the district is providing equitable services one-on-one to that particular private school. Or they could pool within a district by combining Title I Part A funds and pooling within that district, or they could pool across multiple districts, and that is according to the updated guidance from USDE in October 2019. And as I said, that guidance is shared on our website, and I will have a link to it at the end. May an LEA make a decision to pool funds among several private schools to provide equitable services? As a general rule, the LEA cannot make that determination across the board to say all of the private schools within my district, we're going to pool their Title I Part A funds and provide services that way. It must be a topic during the consultation, and the LEA and the private school officials must agree for pooling within an LEA. And so pooling is when several private schools agree to the pooling, the district combines those 3 or 4 schools allocations that were to be used for equitable services, and then that group of schools that agreed to pooling, they receive services directly from the district on a pooling basis. So they may receive more or a little less than what they would receive if they were receiving services directly one-on-one. And so that's generally how pooling works if you're pooling within a district. What if a private school was initially part of the Title I Part A pooling and then declines? And that happens sometimes that after the district has generated what the equitable services would be for that pool, then a private school may have closed or decided that they did not want to participate. Then what happens? The funds that were generated for those equitable services remain within the pool. So you don't, and a district would not subtract those numbers of that school that pulled out. So if that school had 20 eligible Title I Part A students, those 20 students of the eligibility that calculated the equitable share remains within that pool, even though that school pulled out from services. An LEA may allocate any of those funds to private schools that are not a part of that pool. So that is new in the new guidance. If no other private schools are participating, then the funds may not go to the public school. That is different guidance than what they had a year ago from USDE. And so now, as long as there are other private schools, the private school share for equitable services still stays with the private schools. We do not have the question answered, if there is no other private school, what happens with those funds? USDE has not provided a response to that question within their new guidance. Then there are times that an LEA may decide to transfer funds from one program into another program. And so in order to do that, it must be a part of consultation. So for example, an LEA may decide they want to transfer their Title IIA funding, which is professional development for private school teachers and staff, could be used for equitable services in that manner. But if the district decides to transfer 100% of that into Title I Part A, the private school would not have access to Title II professional development equitable services. However, they would have access if they were participating in Title I Part A, then the services to that particular private school would go up because the Title I Part A pot has been increased. That is only if that private school is eligible and wants to participate in Title I Part A funding. Funds may not be left in a program solely for the purposes of providing private nonprofit equitable services. So an LEA must either transfer all of it, or if they leave a portion in a program file, they must also leave a portion for themselves to use within their public district. And then the private school would have access to what equitable services, the proportion of equitable services that is left in that particular fund. Funds may not be transferred into a particular program just for equitable services. May an LEA carry over unobligated funds despite the statutory requirement regarding that you must obligate the funds during the school year for equitable services. USDE's latest guidance says, generally, there should not be any carryover. If the LEA is providing services, is providing consultation meetings at the beginning and throughout the school year with the private school, which is what they're obligated to do, they should be keeping tabs and watching to ensure that the private school is using their equitable services on a regular basis each month, so that at the end of the school year, there should not be any carryover. However, there are a few examples that USDE put as permissible carryover for equitable services, and that would be any natural disasters, any natural disasters, any delayed consultation for with extenuating circumstances, inability to employ qualified personnel to provide that direct instruction from Title I Part A services to the private school. Sometimes we run into that in rural locations where they are unable to find staff at the beginning of the year to provide direct services for Title I Part A private schools. Also, if there's a third-party contractor that estimated what the services would cost, but by the time you actually receive the services, the invoiced amount is less than what was anticipated. Those are just a few examples of the permissible carryover. But again, the district should be working to ensure, as well as the private school, that there is a plan for the entire year on how Title I Part A funds will be used, as well as their other funds for services, so that they don't end up in a carryover situation. The LEA must use any carryover of equitable services to share with those same private schools the following year if they are again participating for the next year. For districts, there is a 15% Title I Part A carryover limitation for their ESSA Title I Part A program. And so one of the questions that USDE received was, how does that 15% carryover limitation for the district apply to equitable services carryover? That carryover requirement or limitation, it's based on the district's total allocation. And so if their total allocation, if that 15% exceeds their total carryover limitation, TEA will not reduce the LEA's, TA will not reduce the equitable service share for the carryover. So for example, if the LEA has 5% of equitable services that they need to carry over, and they have 15% of their own Title I Part A funding still left, so that's 20% that they need to request a carryover. What would happen is TEA would reduce the LEA's carryover, but the reduction does not come from equitable services. So the equitable services carryover, that school would still have their 5%. So your carryover does not get impacted by anything that the district is doing. The only exception is going to be if the private school decline a portion or all of the services, then TEA would consider the funds generated for declined services. One of the most important things for a district and a private school to remember is that there are deadlines for private schools to participate. And so the districts must provide private school officials advance reasonable deadlines. And so during your consultation meeting, you are discussing what is the reasonable deadline for you as a private school to submit requests for supplies, materials, submit requests for professional development opportunities, and any other requests that you may have. The district needs to agree upon a reasonable deadline and provide that deadline to the private school in written form following the first consultation meeting. It needs to have clear and sufficient notice so that the private school knows I need to have low-income data submitted and school addresses or student addresses submitted to the district by October 1, 2020. Whatever that date is, the private school needs to be aware of that. It's very clear in USDE's guidance is that if the deadlines are not met by the private school, when the LEA has given advance notice and it was discussed during consultation, then there are consequences where the private school is basically declining their services if they do not meet the deadlines. So it's very important when you meet as a private school with the LEA to request those deadlines so that you know upfront in the event that you have a district that did not provide you with deadlines at the beginning of the school year. Those deadlines should be written for everything that you're going to participate in so that everyone is aware of the deadlines. The private school should give, or the district should give the private school adequate time for them to respond to those deadlines. So if they cannot make a decision while they're at the consultation meeting and the private school says, I need to speak with the rest of my staff, or there's maybe a key person that is not at the consultation meeting that the staff want to speak with, then they should say, okay, can I have a week? Or can I have 2 weeks to be able to get back with you and assure that this is a reasonable timeline for my private school officials that will need to report this information. What is an LEA's obligation to provide those services if the private school declines to participate or does not respond? The LEA must be able to provide that they made a good faith effort in reaching out to private schools that might be eligible for services. And so the district must keep documentation as well. So they must have that documentation and to say that they made a good faith effort. May a group of private school officials designate a single private school official to represent their interests? Yes. A lot of times, a group of private schools, they will want one person that actually is speaking on behalf of a cohort of private schools. And what needs to happen is that the private school must inform the district in writing of who the designated primary contact for those private schools would be and provide the list of the private schools that they represent. If the private school is not listed under that person's name, then the district is responsible to provide information directly to that private school. The district is not allowed to share information with third parties or any single official that has not been submitted by the private school to say that they are representing their school. How does an LEA determine the number of children who are from low-income families residing in Title I public school attendance areas? The first is you're counting and looking at students who are ages 5 through 17 in order for the district to determine the accurate count of students. They must reside in participating Title I public school attendance areas. And so that's why it's important for private schools that want to participate with Title I Part A, that they provide the low income families of those students who are residing in participating Title I public school attendance areas. And again, if that's information that the private school does not want to share, then they would not be able to participate in Title I Part A services. Again, this is the exact question about the reasonable deadlines is B31. So that if you need to be able to share that with your district or with your private school, you'll know exactly where it is in the guidance. As well as Title I Part A funds must be obligated in a timely manner. They should not be starting in December and January unless there is some rare extenuating circumstance of why they are occurring later. One of the questions that come up all the time is, for equitable services, may Title I Part A just provide may a district just provide a private school with Title I Part A instructional materials, supplies, equipment, and not have instruction? The response is no. USDE, United States Department of Education, has stated that a private school must have direct Title I Part A instructional services for a program. A program must be implemented, not merely the district buying equipment or supplies and materials for the private school. So if the private school does not want to have a Title I Part A program that is directed and supervised by a public district, then the Title I Part A program would not be one in which they would be able to participate. An LEA may, or a third-party contractor, may hire a private school teacher to provide those Title I Part A services if that person is being supervised and receiving instruction from the public school for Title I Part A services and working outside of the time they are employed by the private school. They must be under the direct supervision of a public school official. When there have been desktop audits or audits within the district, there have been times when we found that private school teachers or private school staff or principals or the leaders of the cohorts were providing the direct instruction and direct supervision of that private school staff. That is not permissible. It must be under the direct supervision of a public school. And if that is occurring, then the public school can hire a private school teacher working off contract and as an employee of the district. A district must evaluate those services for Title I Part A. And so each year, at the end of the year, the district should have a survey or some kind of needs assessment. And because they are supervising that staff that's providing the private school students Title I Part A direct instruction, they can work with that person to evaluate those services. Did it meet what it was intended to meet for the private school students? How did it improve? How did the services improve students' academic needs? Okay. Now I'm going to share just a few resources. When you receive the PowerPoint, you will be able to click on all of these links. And one of the links I want to highlight is the TEA private nonprofit, the very first one, which is our webpage. You'll be able to go there directly, and I will show you that. Okay, this is our TEA ESSA Private School Equitable Services webpage. And so this is where it will link you. One of the things that I wanted to point out for private schools that may not know this information, we actually will post the private nonprofit equitable service reservations for each year. We do need to update this, but if you click on these links, it will tell you what the district's allocation is for equitable services. It's not going to give you individual equitable services for each private school campus, but it gives you what the district's overall equitable services is for that particular district. And we will be updating this page. The affirmation of consultation with private school officials, that will be updated to reflect our new affirmation of consultation for 2021. If there are complaints that a private school would have, this gives you the details on what needs to happen and what are the procedures in order to file those complaints. But hopefully we will not have any complaints. That's our goal. And then the other thing I wanted to share is down at the bottom, you will be able to see that there are some video resources. And so you'll be able to go in and click on some of these video resources. There's one that I would recommend if you're the first time working with private schools. There's a private nonprofit school consultation video that's just a few minutes long, and it will help you in seeing how a consultation should look. And then best practices for networking with private nonprofit schools. And then we also have a video that it highlights trust and collaboration among a school district and a private school. And so you'll be able to see what it looks like. It gives you some ideas if you're new to the private school world. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Here's my contact information. You can always contact me. The best way is through email. And I want to, I know that was a lot of information in it seemed like a short amount of time, but I do want to honor the time that we have for this presentation. And I'm going to go over some of the questions that you have submitted. Thank you for those that have submitted questions earlier. And then if you have questions, there are some questions that are in Slido. Under the audience Q&A, and I will go through those as well. One of the questions that I received was, if a parent withdraws their child from the school district and decides to homeschool their child, is the homeschool considered a private nonprofit? The answer is no. A homeschool in Texas, unless it is accredited and has credentials for accreditation, which is very rare, that homeschool would not be considered a private nonprofit. There was a question that was emailed. If we receive calls or emails from third-party providers wanting to meet with us after contacting the private schools, what must we do? As an LEA, your requirement is to work with the private school directly. And until the private school and the district comes to a decision about a third-party provider, the district cannot speak with third-party providers because they're not, until an agreement is reached that yes, the private school would like a third-party provider, but the district has the final approval on if they feel a third-party provider would be in the best interest of providing the services needed for the students. If the district disagrees with having a third-party provider provide those services, then the district would need to provide a written rationale on why they don't feel that a private school should use that third-party provider. Another question that I received through email, there was a question about technology devices to be purchased for student use at the private nonprofit schools. In the past, if you've been working with Equitable Services in the past, our past guidance under USDE was for technology devices to not be purchased for Equitable Services. The guidance that they have put forth, which is the one that I was speaking from in October of 2019 regarding Title I Part A, technology devices, in that guidance, they say yes, a district may purchase technology devices for a private nonprofit school, but there still must be a direct instructional program, and you need to look at the needs. What is the priority for using the Title I Part A funds for Equitable Services? Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions that I received, and if you entered a question in Slido, there is, you should be able to see something that says Qualtrics link attendance sheet. There's a link that has been made available. It is showing live. So if you have not registered your attendance to this meeting through YouTube or through the Zoom meeting, you need to go to the link that is posted, and you'll be able to register your attendance to this meeting. One of the questions is, should we actually request a copy of the IRS Form 501c3 from each private school that's participating? The district will need to have proof that that particular private school is eligible for services. The only way that it can receive documentation is from getting it from the private school. So it is up to the individual private school to prove that yes, it does have private nonprofit status. And so whether that be from sharing the IRS form, 501c3, or some other documentation to the district, that's what the private school would need to do. The burden of proof is on the private school. And so if you don't have documentation to share with the private school that you are participating, then you would not be able to participate with services. And so the burden of proof relies on the private school. There's a question that is asking, what documents should the district use to review what the private school has funded or provided in the prior year to ensure that they're meeting that what they're doing is supplemental? That's would be during your consultation meeting, as you hear what the needs of the private school is. At that point, whatever they have been doing, they should be able to share what they've been doing in the past and what they have. Maybe they've already purchased technology and they have that for their students, but they need assistance with the software, or a teacher, maybe they need professional development for the teachers to be better equipped in providing instruction through that software. They would have to show that burden of proof of what they've already purchased so that you can ensure as a district what you're providing is supplemental. One of the questions is, could the reading services be curriculum or online software? Services must be direct instruction according to the USDE when it comes to Title I Part A. So you cannot just use online software and that be the only instruction that you're providing, because that basically is just providing software. And according to USDE, you must provide direct instruction from a teacher. Now, the software and online services, of course, can be used by that teacher that is employed by the district to aid them as they work with the student. So you can use the online learning as a service, but they still must have a direct instruction to run those services as well. As far as the PowerPoint will be available in a recording of this presentation. Once we have the recording link, it will, everyone that was registered would be able to receive this. And so that's why it's very important for you to put your attendance in the Qualtrics link that you're showing at the top of your live link, Slido link. And it will also be sent to those that were pre-registered as well, because we do know that some were not able to make the meeting this morning. If you participate, one of the questions is, does the LEA submit the affirmation of consultation if they're participating in an SSA? Whoever is the fiscal agent would be the one to submit that affirmation of consultation. So if you're participating in an SSA, then the SSA may be the one that would submit it. And that's something that you would work the LEA and the would work with the ESC or SSA, if that's the route that they're taking, to ensure that any of the participating private schools that have signed a consultation of affirmation is uploaded for TEA. For the affirmation, there's an affirmation question. Can they enter the amount discussed on the date of consultation? Yes, the problem is you probably will not have the amount of carryover. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. You will not have the amount of carryover when you're meeting with a private school at the beginning of the school year. But as you go through the school year and you get to, for example, at the end of the school year and you're having a consultation meeting again, at that point, you can write in, okay, we agree that this is the amount that we will need to carry over for equitable services into next year. You can write that amount in at that time, sign it and date it, and keep it on file with the district and with the private school. Charter schools are not eligible, are not required to provide private nonprofit services. It only applies to independent school districts. So if you're a charter school, you cannot provide equitable services to a private school. Should signatures on the affirmation of consultation be handwritten or digitally typed by email? You can do it either way. It's set up where you could do an electronic signature that'll have the date, or you can just handwrite it and with the date and then give it to the LEA to do the final sign off and submit it. How are homeschool students addressed since in the state of Texas, they are considered private schools? Homeschools are considered private schools in the state of Texas, but they're generally not considered private nonprofit schools in the state of Texas, unless they have an IRS form 501c3. They're just going to be a homeschool, and equitable services do not go to homeschool students or private schools that do not have that private nonprofit status. How would the district get low income data for a new private nonprofit school wanting to participate in order to determine funding for students not there yet? That would be between the school and the public school and the private school. What you're going to look at most of the time, the public school is using a spring date for what students were there last year. So you can put what students were there that would have qualified last year in the first preliminary report to generate services. And you can update that through the year, because you will need to update it after final allocation amounts are made. Whenever there is reallocation of funds by TEA, the district receives a reallocated amount, and at that point, they must reconsult with the district to say what their new amount is for services. It could go up, it could go down for equitable services. And at that point, the district is required to resubmit the equitable services worksheet to show what are the new allocations for equitable services. And at that point, they can also update the students for that current year for both the public and the private, because you will have to have that form submitted by September 3rd. In order for the district to be able to complete their ESSA consolidated application. A question is, who is responsible for starting the yearly consultation meeting? The district is the one responsible for the consultation meeting. And so the district is responsible for trying to locate private schools that are eligible within their district boundaries for Title II, Title III, and Title IV. But for Title I Part A, there could be services available to students that would have been attending the public's Title I Part A school. And so the district is responsible for reaching out to private schools and setting up consultation meetings. If you are a brand new private school that maybe the district doesn't even know that you have opened, it is allowable for you to contact the district in your local boundaries to let them know you have opened or you're going to be opening this summer for students to start for the next school year, so that they are aware of new private schools within their boundaries so that they can contact you. And then the LEA would start with all the information for consultation. The PowerPoint, as I said earlier, will be available later. It will be available to participants. Someone has a question on pooling. That probably was before I started describing it, but I'll describe it again in case you missed it. Pooling is actually where you have several PNP, private nonprofit schools, that would like to take their equitable shares and put them together and receive services as one pooled campus. And the district is the one that would work with you on, if there are 5 private schools that want to participate in pooling and 10 do not, then the LEA works with the 10 separately who do not want to pool. But then for the 5 that are in the pool, they would share. If it was $2,000 worth of equitable services, then they would share that $2,000 worth of services among those 5 schools. And the LEA would decide how those services are provided. You will work with the LEA to look at who are the neediest students for Title I Part A in order to receive services. For standalone pre-K school participation, I was asked to clarify that. If there is a building, a private school building that is only a pre-K building, they have preschool and maybe they also have daycare in there, but they do not have a kindergarten level or first grade through 12th grade. They don't have any of those levels. If they do not have a kindergarten level in that private school's pre-kindergarten or early learning, they are not eligible for services. It must be a pre-kindergarten plus at least one other grade level in order for them to possibly be eligible for services. There's a question asking, does TEA have a list or know how to locate private schools within a school district attendance zone? And I am going to show that to you of where you can go to get that. Because TEA does not keep a list of private schools, but one of the links that you'll have at the end is for TEPSAC. And so I'm going to share this link so that you can see. Okay, on my screen, you should see Texas Private School Accreditation Commission. That's their homepage. Well, up at the top, if you click on search schools, that gives you all of the accredited schools in Texas. And so, for example, if you're a private school or an LEA in the Houston district, I just typed in home district Houston, and then it pulls up all of the schools that are located, that are private schools that are accredited in Houston's district. And then the district can reach out to these schools to see, number one, are they eligible? Do they have students that are eligible? Do they want to participate? And that's how you could get a list of those schools that are private schools. Now, like I said, that's going to be their accredited schools. Go back to the PowerPoint and share that. Okay. All right. There's a question about the pooling. How do you determine pooling amounts for each private school once all private schools have decided to pool? Normally, it's going to be on a, I'm sorry if your screen just blanked out. Normally, it's going to be on a per pupil basis of all of those students that are within that pool, and that, but actually, I mean, you'll have a per pupil amount, but actually you won't be saying this school gets $2,000, this school gets $500 worth of services, because you're pooling. Because once you start pooling, it takes away the individual campus amounts, like in an application, but the district would be able to provide how much each of those campuses are receiving, because they have to keep that in their files, and they would be able to share that information with you. There are a lot of questions. I'm just scrolling through because some of them are duplicates. Okay. One of the questions is about including pre-K as eligible. Then you continued with counts, including K-12. District students qualify pre-K, while private nonprofit pre-K do not qualify. The link that I have on the PowerPoint, it will show you that your the pre-K school students, if they're in an eligible building for public and private, they can receive services, but they do not generate funding. It's two different things. They don't, for generating funding for Title I Part A, you will use ages 5 through 17 for public and ages 5 through 17 for private. And so there is no difference in the ages that you're calculating. And that is in our funding guidance. So I'll post that link. I'll make sure that that link is in here. The link for the pre-K guidance from USDE is already in there, but I will add the TEA link as well as the statute. The ESSA statute in 1117 states for that the LEA and the private school, they're using ages 5 through 17 to calculate. I have a question. If the private school did not use their funds this year, will these funds then carry over? I will say it depends. If a private school did not use funds at all, because services could have started in September and went through March before school was closed down. And so that's what you would have to look at as an LEA. Was it that they didn't receive any services from Title I Part A from September until March, when we ended up in closing schools and schools going to virtual learning? Or is it that they received some of the funds services up until March, and then in March, for whatever reason, they did not receive the remaining services? So those are two separate questions. If it's that from March, when the state shut down, until the end of the school year, that they did not receive services, yes, that will be an automatic carryover, and that question is posted on our website. But if it's that they did not receive services from September until March, then please contact me directly, and I can, and that will be an individual district private school situation that I can discuss. I have a question. Despite ongoing consultations, a private school keeps changing their plans. What point in the year can the participation affirmation form be updated to not participating? This is where it goes back to the timeline of private schools. Sharing that timeline at the very beginning of the school year to say, here is the deadline to say you want to participate with services. Here's the deadline of when you need to have that to us. If they change their mind and it's past that deadline, then you need to get something from the private school to say, we no longer desire to participate. And you can change that affirmation of consultation form to say not participating at any time up until June. I believe it's June 3rd, but I'll add that date to the PowerPoint slide. So at that point, you would not have, you can change that for the school. But if it's that the school can not make up their mind to participate or not, then that is when the district can say, if you did not let us know by this date that you wanted to participate, and then you did not allow us to start services by this date, then that is basically saying you have declined services. There's a question, do we need to submit a carryover approval form for private schools this year, which would be 2019 to 2020, since it's now automatically approved? No, because that was one of the Q&As that's in the COVID-19 website, frequently asked questions. It's saying that carryover will be automatically approved unless you're in one of those situations that I addressed earlier about you never gave services from September until March. Next question. So how are the new funds going to be dispersed to private nonprofit? What forms need to be filled out? Today, we are talking about the ESSA, Equitable Services. And so for that, number one, the private school never received services. They never received funds, they received services. And so the form would be the consultation form that they would go over with the district. And that is how they would generate services, because then the district does the rest of the paperwork for the Every Student Succeeds Act programs. What does TEA and USDE consider to be sufficient notice for written timeline and deadlines? 1 week or 2 weeks? That will be something that you need to, as a district and private school, to agree upon. a district should already have a timeline drafted when they meet with the private school at the very beginning of the school year, or whenever they started the consultation meetings. They should come with a draft to say these are the drafted timelines, deadlines that we have, because they're going to have deadlines for their own public school to turn in requests for supplies, to turn in requests for professional development. And so it could be easy. Maybe that first meeting, the private school says, yes, we agree to those timelines. And if they agree to those timelines, then you have it. If not, then that's something that the private school and the district will need to work out, because it's not written in law what is considered the significant or let me look for the word, what is considered sufficient notice. USDE did not define that. But if you gave draft guidance as a public district to of the deadlines to the private school, and they said, I need 2 months to think about that, that would be too long. So hopefully you can come to an agreement with a timeline on making a decision, so you both could sign off and say, this is the deadline that's going to work. Since it is required that title funds are spent earlier in the year to prevent stockpiling, what is a reasonable deadline for PNP spending, March or April? That is a question where the district and the private school should be looking at a plan at the beginning of the school year to say, this is what we're doing in each of the programs that we're participating in. These are the activities that we would like to have. And it should be written out by the month, so that they can ensure that by the time those funds would expire in a normal year, that they have a timeline that's going to have those funds expended. There are going to be times when there are extenuating circumstances that happen, maybe a professional development that was planned that all of a sudden they had to pull out of because the speaker got sick and there was no professional development activity. So there are going to be some times when there will be some carryover. And so, but if you start off the beginning of the year with a timeline of activities and deadlines, hopefully you're not going to end up with stockpiling, because that's one of the things that USDE was looking at when across the country, when they saw different private schools, that it was a snowball effect of piling up the services. And if a private school is not able to consistently use the services within that school year, then that is a problem. And that's when you go through consultation and work out a different plan that's going to work better with the private school. What does direct supervision of private school staff by an LEA look like? The LEA, the public district, is the one that will hire the private nonprofit staff. If that is the case, they will be hired off contract. And the public school is the one that gives them, this is the lesson, these are the lesson plans, this is what you'll need to work with those students on. Let's work on what activities you will have, be working with those students on for, this month. They will be providing feedback to the district on how students are doing. So it would be the same as a district that maybe had a reading coach, and some of their teachers were reporting to the reading coach how the students were performing academically, as well as receiving support and additional strategies from the public school. Do we need to post the specific ESSA private school reservations on our district website? TEA posts the district level reservations on their website. As long as you can provide the private school with what their allocation is for services, the individual private schools, and you have a record of it, that is sufficient. Or you may post it on your website as well. I know that we're running out of time. There's a lot more questions. And what I will do with the remaining questions that you have, because there's a whole list of them, I will not make it through all the questions that over 800 people had. So what I will do is add to this PowerPoint some Q&As so that I can address the other questions that were listed on the page that you submitted, so that you will have the answers once you get the PowerPoint slides, because I want to ensure that your questions are answered. And if you have a question that is unique to your specific district, then you can contact me directly. And there's my email address is pnpombudsman@tea.texas.gov to submit questions, or you can go into the Slido link, which is the slido.com, and it is event number PNP 101, and you can put questions there for the next couple of days, and then we will shut that down so that I can start responding to all the questions. I want to respect your time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of this. And just make sure that as districts and private schools, you are collaborating and trying your best to meet agreement on the services that are going to be provided to the private school. And the private school look to the district to answer your questions about services specific to your private school and how they may provide services to you, and if services are even available, because there are some private nonprofit schools where services will not be available to your school. And so that's when you work individually with that public district in which your school resides to see if you're eligible for services. Okay, it is 11:30. Thank you for your time. And we will continue to have more webinars in the future for private schools alone. There will be one on June 16th coming up, and the link will be sent out for that. You'll pre-register for that again, and that particular June 16th training will be on private nonprofit and the CARES Act, which is completely different from the ESSA program requirements. And so if you will be participating or interested in how the CARES Act responds to equitable services, requirements for equitable services, please join us on June 16th, and that link will be shared later as we get closer to June 16th.